versus non-tradition. I mean, how we normally do stuff and how different we could do stuff. Tim, please, karibu. How we could do stuff. I mean, if we think of how we could do something, it's not how we usually do it. So when we talk about tradition versus non-tradition, we're just looking at how things could be done or how they are done and how do we do or how could we do better. And as we have looked through the scripture, we have seen how Jesus did. I mean, sometimes when you think of how we could do things, it's not easy because it requires something different. And doing something out of routine brings attention or brings change. This is not how we do it. Be it wrong, be it right. Is this how we do it? Even there are ways that we do our mistakes, as much as there are ways how we do something right. What I wanted to say is, when you do something different, that means not traditionally, you might face opposition. You will most probably face opposition from yourself, from others. Because if you are in the comfort of doing something in a routine, when you do something different, you have to start learning how to do it because you don't have experience of how it's done. And there is the way that you're used to do it, which is easier. And you can face it from others. And now, speaking about facing it from yourself or from others, that means if it's opposition, it's different. If it's different, one thing I've grown up to learn is it does not mean that your opposition is your enemy. Probably the opposition is somebody who is scared of change. You want to change something. The person is not ready to face the change. Or you are not ready to face the change. So you are in this struggle. Or somebody is not ready. Or the community is not ready. So they are not your enemy. They're just people who are not prepared to accept the change. Or they don't understand change. You see, so we are all on a different pace while moving towards change. So we have seen these 3 weeks. I call them 3 weeks marathon because personally it felt like I've been running through these weeks. It has been a Monday to Sunday thing. When we are talking about come as you are with Ondo and the team here, and then it got me this feeling as you're coming, it's a hospital, you just can come as you are. And I'm trying to say myself, can I walk into any place as I am? And that means we know ourselves better than anybody else. Sometimes you're like, I am tired. You know, simply like I'm tired. But sometimes you might look yourself like, no, let's say I have stage 4 cancer. This is beyond repair. You see? But then to the hospital, come as you are. Because there is hope when you do that. There is a chance when you do that. And then the following week when we did the confession, putting things into the light, you know, being at a safe place, that's something that we really need to find when we go to, when we are looking to where to go to. So this week when you're looking at tradition versus non-tradition, and when we reflect ourselves as a community, as a family, as a Vineyard family, there might be stuff we do different from everybody else, from any other stream, or there are some stuff that we do that you might question, or somebody else might be questioning you, and you might not know, you might not have the answer. I think it's good because we encourage questions, and then we should be encouraged to ask ourselves those questions. Why do we do what we do? Because when we do something, and if people, or if there is an opposition, it's probably something different. And then they question. But does different always mean wrong? Does it? Did Jesus going to the well, was he wrong? If he didn't go, what would have happened? Was the risk too big? a man going to the well and meeting a woman alone, a woman with not such a good reputation. Can we do that? We striving every day to be more like Christ. In our situations, would we be able to do that, or normally we don't do that? I'm really comfortable just being who I am, doing the good thing that I can do from where I am, because I'm not ready to put a black dot on my reputation. I mean, being there, seeing Jesus going to speak to that woman, I would have questioned. That is to be frank. If Jesus would have asked me to go, being his direct disciple, I'd be like, alone? You see? That woman, nobody else. But we all saw everything that came out of that. So, I'd love to welcome Skylar to keep sharing.
Thank you, Moyo. This whole thing of Jesus calling us to do things that are very across the grain of culture or family. I want to look at a few examples throughout the Bible. Like, we can look and see in God's story that he weaves throughout the Bible, there's plenty of examples of him telling people to do some absurd things. One man named Noah, you guys know him very well. I like to think of him as a builder. Maybe that's just because I'm a builder and I'm projecting that onto him. I don't know. But God gives him blueprints. He says, this is what I want you to build. And this is how long it's to be. And Noah's like, okay, all right. And I like to think of him as known amongst the community. Yeah, Noah's the one who did the renovations at the Momque's house. And he did the renovations at so-and-so. People knew him. And then they see him building this thing. And the foundation is very different than everything else. And I can picture Noah saying to God, okay, what are the foundations going to be like? We're going to build a big, wide foundation to hold this structure you want me to build? And he said, no, it's probably going to be like pointy at the bottom and then get bigger and bigger at the top. You picture Noah like, what? God, that's not how we make foundations. And then, well, what is this thing going to be for? It's going to be for water. Well, why aren't we building it over by the water? Oh, the water's going to come to you. How? It's going to come from the sky. And until this point, it had never rained before. So you can think of all these absurd things that are like, what? And yet Noah did it. And so he was the laughingstock of his community, I'm sure. What is he doing? What is he building? And I can think of his other builder friends, What happened to the old man? He went crazy. He did some great renovations before, and now what is he doing? That's not how you build a foundation. And so that's one example. We can look also, Abraham, God said, go to a new place where I will call you. And he said, okay, no visa, nothing. Can you imagine getting up now and trying to go to the States and not having a visa? You just show up, what's going to happen? And God says, when you show up, I'll be there. I'll provide what you need when you need it. So Abraham did some crazy things. Another man named Gideon, back in that time, God's people were called to be set apart. We're still called to be set apart. Set apart, very different from the people around. And all the people around had idols and worshiped different gods to, this will make your maize grow. This will keep your house safe. This will keep your cows healthy. Different things. We probably have some examples here, in our cultures around us. But God said, you're different. You do not keep those gods in your house. And Gideon's father had welcomed in this Asherah pole. And God told Gideon, I need you to destroy that. And so not only was Gideon doing something that the entire culture, everyone around said, no, it was okay. And then God's people themselves at that time had started to begin to believe, no, that's okay. And his family, his own father, said, no, this is okay. This is how we're going to do it now. And so what God told Gideon to do was in complete opposition to his father, to his family, to his immediate culture, to the whole culture all around him. All of the above. I also love moving forward when we see the picture of when our Messiah was coming into this earth. And Matthew to start his book about Jesus, he gives a genealogy, which was very important in those days. It was important to know, where do you come from? Which I think is similar in Tanzanian culture. Who's your dad? What culture? What clan are you from? But what was important was who your father was, who the men in your lineage were. Do you know Matthew includes 4 women in the genealogy, which was completely different than the culture of the time. He mentions Rahab. He mentions Tamar, Bathsheba, and who was the other? Ruth. And Ruth as well. And so this was very different. But so the culture that Christ is wanting to create, we're called to live a kingdom culture, we call it. It is going to be very across the grain, or very counter a lot of the cultures around us. And this is kind of setting the stage for what we're going to talk about today. How are the ways that we're different? And one thing I wanted to touch on is kind of looking back a little bit on last week. We started a conversation that was a huge conversation about living a confessional lifestyle here at Arusha Vineyard Church. And what does that look like? And I wish we had more time to hear answers from your guys' table discussions. We talked about what are some boundaries that keep us from living in the light, from bringing things into the light. And there are many. And I got to hear some responses from people afterwards, or what people had talked about. And it was really interesting. Some people, it said, well, confession, maybe for other cultures, but it can't be done in our culture. Our culture is just, has too many boundaries. That's one thing to think about. Or our own families we have boundaries within our family culture. It was even talked about, well, confession is not manly. You can't be a man and confess. And, man, it's like, first of all, that just seems ridiculous to me. I want us to continue these conversations. I want us to continue thinking about these things and wrestling with these things. Is living confessionally challenging in this culture? Yes, I understand that. I would also like to say it's a challenge in any culture. It's cross-cultural across the board. Okay, it's let's not use that as an excuse. And as we've seen in the biblical examples, God is calling us to do some radical things. The way He's called us to live is very different than the people around us. And as far as confession not being manly, I just want to say, if you got 2 people, one person, I've got this dirty secret and I'm going to take it to the grave with me and not tell anyone. You got another person, I got this dirty secret, but this is not who I want to be, and I'm going to come to someone I love and trust and say, hey, I did this, and this is not who I want to be, but I did this, and so that's why I'm sharing this, because I want to be free from this. Which one of those requires more bravery? Right? Who's the coward? I think it takes a lot of bravery to own up to our stuff. To own up to it and say, this is what I'm struggling with. So, as we're talking in this series about what are values here at Arusha Vineyard Church, I again want to just reiterate that living transparently, living in the light, we are committed to being in process. We're not trying to hide. We're not trying to put up perfect faces. And I think this is God's heart too. Another thing I love about the Bible is the heroes of the Bible also have their dirty stuff in there too. Right? That it wasn't left out of the pages. We know about David and Bathsheba. You can even read about Noah. We're talking about Noah. Noah had some disgraceful things happen after the flood. There's so many stories. Everyone is in process, and yet God still uses us. So that's a value of ours here. And in the leadership, I'm going to transition to Purnima in a little bit. She's going to talk about the leadership here at Arusha Vineyard. But you will see and hear leaders share things from up front that are very much in process, because we want to be to model that Christ is still working on all of us. None of us have made it. Yeah. Karibu Purnima.
and tradition, and I want to just talk about the tradition first because I come from that part. A lot of tradition and rituals. I come from a. Is this okay? I come from a Hindu background, and Hinduism is all about tradition, rituals, like. Even if, like, it's for example, if you don't, conceiving, a ritual is done. If you're not doing any good in your business, you go to the priest and a ritual is done. Everything is about ritual. And everything is performed by the priest. You go to the priest and he does the rituals and the, ceremonies. Well, growing up like that, I always used to question. It was like, I don't believe this. This is something that I really, really questioned. And it was really hard for me to follow. Didn't go to the temple much because it just made me very angry all the time whenever I was there. There was no peace. I couldn't worship because I was questioning all that. And when you go to the temple, the priest has this special chair, the cushions, the nice bedding, like he sits on that, and the rest sit on the floor. And even that I questioned because I thought he's just like us. Yes, he is qualified he's been to school for all these things that he's doing, but I still questioned. It was really hard to relate, with that tradition and culture. And when in school I had heard about Jesus, but had never been to church. I mean, didn't know anything, didn't even know about the Bible, nothing at all. 2007, I was 42 then, and Jesus came in our lives, my husband, Chandu, and I, in our lives like in an amazing way. We believed, something happened, just something changed, and we believed and followed, like literally. I just was so like wanting to know all about him and why do I feel this difference, By then we didn't go to church. We tried a few churches. I didn't connect. Somehow some reminded me of the temple or, the tradition. And some I found too loud, which I couldn't concentrate. And when I would be out of there, I would be angry at myself because just try harder, and I couldn't. So we didn't go to any church so I think there wasn't much growth. But still the journey, the 2 years before starting church was just wonderful, just knowing him, going to small home groups and to know about him. 2009 is when my daughter Nikki had just come back from Canada after her studies, and that's when a friend who was visiting us from Tanga, and she was staying with us, and she asked, do you want to try? Just come, maybe you'll like it. And we thought, okay. So 2009, August, was after 2 years of believing in Jesus, we thought of, okay, let's try this church. And at that time, it was at Mezzaluna. And as we entered, I was like, oh, church, okay, I'll go, because Nikki wants to go, I'll just go. But churches are so boring. I don't know. I find them so boring. And so we went anyway. I asked my husband, why don't you join us? And he's like, no, you go ahead. If it's good, I'll join you next week. So, okay, so Nikki and I, both of us went. And as we entered, it was like, oh, this is church. Similar to this, it was at Mezzaluna, the tables, the setting of the tables, tea, coffee, people, I just saw people talking to one another and just having fun just before the start of the church service. And I was like, oh, wow, this is so different. I felt like I was at a party, like this is fun, and so it was, yeah, and I remember that day David was talking, and he had jeans on, with a shirt, no special clothing, like how we would in our temple, like the priest wears a special clothes. And I didn't see any seat for him, a special seat where he would be sitting. In fact, I didn't even know who the pastor was for the first 2 weeks. Because it was David first week talking, and then somebody else on the second week. I just loved it, and I really felt, and like I connected, and I felt that was something that I was looking for. First, open space, sit where you are, talk to, have coffee while you're listening to the sermon. I've never seen this anywhere, and that was so. So from that day onwards, we never missed. The following week, my husband joined, and since then we've been here at Vineyard. Now that's the physical part of it. That drew us to go there every week after week. Like we decided to continue. Now the spiritual part. What I really liked was I just saw David and whoever was sharing people and all the people, when I connected with them, they were so open about their struggles, their stories. They would say their stories, come up here and say their stories, and I was like, oh wow, this is different. And that made me like share my story openly, which in our culture, in our tradition, you are not supposed to share what you're going through even. Never. You keep it to yourself, because that is used as weakness. You're weak. And especially if you're going through a financial problem, do not share it with anybody, because you're going to be judged. They're going to be looking down on you and all these things, And everything was like, wow for me. I was like, this is amazing. And I learned to share. I learned to be open. It took a while. Week after week, I was just, there was so much learning. There was so much, and I felt like really, really free. I felt like one of the things was Jesus loves you unconditionally. Never heard God loves you unconditionally, because all I knew was like, you have to do something. If you made a mistake, you have to do a ritual. You have to go to the priest. You have to do this. And there's always something to do, or you have to fast. From where I come from, the grace of God. Oh wow, that's really something. And I, like how Skylar says, I really learned to be vulnerable. Like, it is okay. It is so okay to be who you are with your friends and family, and just be open with your problems or whatever you're going through and what you feel, even the weirdest thought you get sometimes. And I like to do that. I like to share it. And I know that even if somebody judges me, it doesn't really matter, because I learned that it is God who doesn't judge, and that's what matters the most, And so that is what I wanted to share. And about the leadership at Vineyard, it's been like a little while since I've been in the leadership. Let me put down my phone. Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, Purnima is part of the leadership team here. And I think that also goes to some people don't know that.
Yeah, I'm part of the leadership, core leadership. Yeah, and so I wanted to share when I was asked by Judy, and at first I was like, oh, I don't have the qualifications to be a leader. Like in my head, it's like like a pastor has to go to school, and so not a pastor, but even being in the leadership, you have to have and they were like, no. And I said, okay. And I learned I don't have to have answers to everything. Being a leader wasn't so much pressure. It isn't pressure that, if somebody asks you for something, you would have to know the answer. I also learned we are all in the process of growing. We all in the same boat. Like Judy and David share with us their whatever they're going through, and I feel, oh, so it's because they're so open. I think that really they're so vulnerable that makes you feel like we're in this together, and I don't get the pressure of like, oh, I have to perform well, and I have to look my best, or just do my best, and don't have to put on a mask. I can be who I am. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you.
Before I forget, and I can't forget or my wife will kill me, my wife Diane and my son Caleb say hello to you all. So this is them waving to you, okay? They miss you and they would like to be here. We had thought that Caleb might come down and join me here, but it didn't work out. He's, incidentally, if you're wondering, teaching people how to speak English in the Middle East, and he's having a blast. You can pray for him because he's not in an entirely safe location. But anyway, he's having a ball. My story is very different from yours. I grew up being very churchy. And those of you who have been over-churched know what I mean. And 2 weeks ago when Vishal spoke, and he mentioned that he was a pastor's kid, and I'm going, I hear you, buddy, I hear you. Okay. But I loved going to church, and I was a Canadian Baptist, which is not exactly the same as a Southern Baptist, but we have a very specific pattern of services, or at least we used to do. And I could predict at any particular second in the service what would happen the next second. But I like that. But some of you know Antonio and Nabil, and we've been talking about the fact that, especially in the Western world, the church seems to be losing more and more influence, even, I think, in many ways, shooting itself in the foot and doing itself serious harm. And I will admit that in my probably early 30s, when I would go back to Canada and I would attend a church service, I would just think, there's no joy here anymore. It's mild panic mixed with indifference. That's what church had become, was mild panic mixed with indifference. Now, I taught at a school in Kenya for 18 years, and when I first moved to that location, it's up in the Kenya highlands, wonderful and very regular rainy seasons, gloriously wonderful topsoil, and everyone was poor. And I just thought, this can't be right. My province is rich, and we've got the worst soil in the world in Canada. This can't be right. And I started trying to figure out what could be done about it. So there were these two dynamics, this sadness about what was going on in the church in America, and the confusion and sadness of why are the Kenya Highlands so poor? It should not be. I remember a friend of mine saying, if hard work always resulted in success, African women would be the richest people in the world, especially if the farmers. And it just isn't so. Well, shortly after I left there and moved down to another area of Kenya, a friend of mine from Rift Valley Academy called me and said, hey, Tim, there's this guy from South Africa you got to meet. He evangelizes using farming. And I thought, he's a nut job. You cannot evangelize using farming. But he and I met. We became the guardians for his children, actually. And we became very good friends. But he told us a story about a man from Zimbabwe who was vaguely Christian-ish. And he was a tobacco farmer. And his farm collapsed because of several bad harvests. So he started working for another company and almost got fired because of another bad harvest. And he just said, Lord, what can I do to support my family? And at the same time, his children were saying, Dad, you're a Christian. You can't grow tobacco. You can't do that. And so his second prayer was, help me to support my family in a way that gives you glory. And that's how Farming God's Way came to be. It was this one guy in Zimbabwe. And he in his first year, had the highest yield rate that he's ever had before and since, growing maize. Not tobacco, but maize, life-giving maize. And it's August, the guy that was telling me all this, I just kept thinking, come on. I know that if anything sounds too good to be true, it's because it's too good to be true. And he just said, look, I don't even want you to take my word for it. Just before the next rains, try it. And I tried it. And my landlord came to me. I was living in a big game reserve. And the landlord came to me and he said, I hear you're going to plant maize. And I said, yes. And he says, don't. We've tried many times and you just can't grow maize here. It's too dry. And I said, Gogi, I believe you. Thuo. Gogi was another guy in the group. Thuo, I believe you. But I've been challenged about this by a Christian, and Thuo, by the way, was also a Christian, to try this new thing called Farming God's Way. And I said, I'll tell you what, if I can grow maize here, you owe me a meal at the restaurant out at the end of the road. And if I can't, then I'll buy you a meal at the restaurant at the end of the road. He says, okay. Well, boy, howdy, did it work. It was unbelievable. And when Thuo was a member of a tribe called the Kikuyu, there might be some here. Any Kikuyus here? If so, I'm your guy. Anyway, when they get really excited, their response is, see. And he walked over when I called him and I said, Thuo, you need to come over and see my maize. And before he was even on my property, I could hear him saying that. And he was just dumbfounded. And by the way, I never did get my free meal. He still owes me. So I'll have to keep coming back to Africa. But I thought then, if this is the thing that was revealed to that Zimbabwean man, I am in. So I contacted my friend and he said, no, that's just the growing part. We use this to spread the story of Christianity, to spread the love of Christ. Now at this point, I just want to read a passage of scripture because this has actually become my favorite passage and it's part of the training of Farming God's Way. It's Isaiah speaking, but it's God's words in a very direct way. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay. I have a big mouth, so it's usually not a problem. And God is angry that the Israelites are going through all the rituals, the ritual for this, the ritual for that, the fasting, the praying, the sacrifice, the fasting, the praying, the sacrifice. But in that cycle was also great sinfulness, not honoring God, not obeying the laws that he put in place in the Old Testament. So this is God speaking. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only one day for people to humble themselves? Is this only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and to untie the ropes of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will spread out ahead of you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. And you will call, and the Lord will answer. And you will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and the malicious talk, and you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will shine in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. And here's the best part. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land. And this is really my life passage, is to make the light of Christ shine in what is clearly more and more every year a sun-scorched land. And if you had asked me 25 years ago how I ever thought I would make a difference in Africa, I would say, oh, I'll just stay here teaching. And if you had said, how in the world could you, as a farmer, win souls through farming? I would have said, not a clue. Not a clue. But the first time it happened, I was in Lesotho. And we had a group of about 15 farmers, every single one of them completely illiterate, none of them practicing Christians. And I and my friend from South Africa began speaking to these men. And one man just sat in the back like this. And in fairness, men from Lesotho are always kind of grim looking. It's their way, but this guy was seriously grim. And at the beginning, my friend from South Africa prayed over the seminar and then turned and prayed over all of these men. And then we did the training. And then they went out in the fields and started planting. And at the end of it, my friend said, now I want you to know that this is a farming technique. And you've heard many farming techniques over your lives. And the experts have come and they've told you this and they've told you that and they've told you this. And he said, but the one that you are hearing now brings the blessing of God through his son, Jesus Christ. And at the end of it, several of those men became Christians. But the other kicker is this. At the end of the harvest, most of those men became Christians. Unfortunately, not the man that sat in the corner like this. But I have seen here in Lesotho, in Liberia, and in Canada, I have people who are very skeptical of farming, very skeptical of Jesus Christ, become believers in the truest sense of both of those words. So how is a new approach to take the church out of the building? This is the one that I've found. And many other people before and after me have used farming God's way to the glory of God. I just want to wrap up with a question for you to think through. And this is not for discussion later because I don't have that kind of authority. But we look at a banker who has got rich and we thought he must be a crook. We look at a politician or even a business owner and say they must be crooked because they are rich. They have taken the money that is rightfully mine. But nobody ever looks at a farmer and says, this man must be getting rich because he's stealing my money. As a matter of fact, almost nobody looks at a farmer and said, that farmer must be rich, because they all know farmers are not rich. But I'm saying this, if we hold politicians to account, if we hold bankers to account, if we hold our pastors to account and say, are you living to the glory of God? Is your profession glorifying God? Then why do we say that to the farmers? How is your farm glorifying God? And if it isn't, let me help you with that. Because I believe that we should be able to drive through the countryside and say, that farm is owned by Christians. So those of you who like the feel of a djembe in your hands, those of you who like to see that perfect maize, those of you who like to see those beans just jumping through the ground and producing the seeds, consider that as possibly a calling to a ministry that will take the church out of the building and into the community. It's been a lot of fun, and I praise God and thank him that he took me out of the church building, he took me out of the classroom, and gave me a whole new purpose in life.
Asante team. Thank you, Bonima, Sky. So, when I'm here, I think that's why God made me short. I can think well in high elevation.